This happened over a decade ago, but even now the memory creeps back like a shadow slipping through the cracks of my mind. It waits until I'm alone, until the world is still, and then it whispers, reminding me just how close I came to something I don't even want to name. I was 12 years old, living in a small, quiet town in Oklahoma. The kind of place where everyone waved from their porches and kids played in yards without fences. Our neighborhood was spread out, houses separated by long stretches of woods that whispered with every breeze. Isolation was normal out here. It felt peaceful, until that day when it became terrifying. It was early fall. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the sun still burned warm in the afternoons. My grandma picked me up from school like always and dropped me off at home around 3 p.m. It was my first year staying home alone after school, a rite of passage. Just me in the house until my dad got home at 4:30 and mom a little after. But that day, both of them were delayed. Dad wouldn't be home until after 7, and mom had parent-teacher conferences that would keep her at school until 8. I wasn't worried. It was bright out. I was 12, and Minecraft with my friend Seth was calling. I ran upstairs, turned on the Xbox 360, and settled into the warm, glowing comfort of a pixelated world. Seth and I were building an underground fortress, laughing and making plans for lava traps. Everything felt normal, safe, until I heard it. A car door, loud, sharp, final. It echoed through the stillness of the house like a gunshot. I froze. Our upstairs windows overlooked the driveway. I got up, controller in hand, mic still on, and peeked out the blinds. A red truck was in our driveway, but not parked normally. It was crooked, half on the lawn, as if the driver had swerved in without a second thought. The kind of parking that says, "I won't be here long." My stomach tightened. A man stepped out, heavy camo hoodie pulled tight despite the warm September air. A baseball cap sat low over his eyes, hiding most of his face. He moved like he wasn't in a rush, like he belonged there. He walked up to the front door. I told Seth, tried to sound casual. Maybe it was a delivery guy, maybe a friend of Dad's. But my voice cracked. I knew better. My dad would have said if someone was stopping by. Then came the knock. One, then another. Slow and deliberate. I moved to another window just in time to see him turn and walk away from the door. A wave of relief washed over me until he didn't go back to his truck. He walked past it, straight to the side garage door, and tried the handle. My heart dropped. "He's trying to get in," I whispered to Seth with trembling voice. That door, sometimes we forgot to lock it. That day we hadn't. He moved on, calm and controlled, like he was just checking off a list. Next, the back of the house. I dropped my headset, slowly crept downstairs, every creak of the floor sounding like a scream. I stayed low, pressed against the wall, eyes locked on the living room windows. I couldn't see him, but I heard him. The click of the back door handle, followed by a heavy thud. A tool? A rock? A crowbar? It wasn't just a noise, it was intent. Someone trying to get in. I wanted to run and call someone, but I didn't have a phone. The only one we had was mounted in the kitchen, right in view of the living room windows. If he was watching, I'd be a clear target. So I stayed frozen. My heart pounded in my ears. My breath caught in my throat, and then silence. I peeked around the corner. The back porch was empty. I bolted upstairs, snatched my headset, and told Seth everything. My voice cracked with panic. Then we both heard it, another car door. I rushed back to the window. The man was in the truck now, just sitting there, watching the house, motionless, like he was thinking, calculating. That's when I saw what was in the bed of the truck, a crowbar and a shovel. He wasn't a thief. He didn't come for things. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, then slowly backed out and drove away. I tried to get a look at his license plate, but the angle made it impossible, like he'd parked that way on purpose. I didn't move until he was completely out of sight. Once the truck was gone, I crept downstairs to the back door. I needed to see what had made that sound. And that's when I knew he hadn't just tried, he had planned. The welcome mat had been shoved aside. The large potted plants that flanked the door had been moved deliberately, as if someone had searched beneath them. I checked the front porch too. Same thing. Pots pushed aside and soil spilled. He was looking for a key, and we had one. A spare key which is hidden under a small pot just inches from where he had searched. He had almost found it. I called my dad the moment I felt safe enough to move. When he got home, he brought the police. I told them everything. The red truck, the man, the crowbar, the shovel. I described the clothing, the way he moved, how he never once hesitated. He never came back. But sometimes I still see that truck, hear the knock, feel the silence that followed, because people like him don't come to steal. They come to enter, quietly, calmly, like they already belong inside. And that kind of person doesn't come for things. They come for people. My name is Nancy, and I had worked in mental health group homes and facilities for over 30 years. I had seen it all, and not much frightened me. Preferring night shifts due to a lifelong struggle with insomnia, I figured that if I wasn't going to get any sleep at night anyway, I might as well be working. The pay wasn't great, but it paid my bills, and I enjoyed the connections that I made with my coworkers and residents over the years. When the night shift opening at Everlove Behavioral Health Group home was posted 6 weeks ago, I immediately applied and got the job. As I lay on the living room couch in the darkened front room, I listened to the sounds that penetrated the quiet. The ticking of the clock that hung next to the television sounded loud in my ears. A car would drive by every so often, lighting the room briefly with its headlights. Besides the low hum of the refrigerator, there were few other sounds. But what is that shuffling noise? It was familiar as I had heard it every night of the last month I had worked at Everlove. The first few times I heard the shuffling noise, I just assumed residents also struggled to sleep at night and were pacing around in their rooms. I never looked for the source because it didn't occur to me that the noise didn't belong. Long hours awake at night meant that I often heard strange sounds that were simply masked by the relatively louder daytime noises. But this time I was more aware of the sound. This time felt different. That is when I realized I could also hear quiet murmuring. I strained to hear the words, but it was far too quiet. Slowly walking into the hallway, the sound became more distinct, and I could tell it was coming from Stan's room. Stan suffered from schizophrenia and frequently had auditory and visual hallucinations. Hesitating at the door, I wondered if I should knock and check on him or just let it pass. I was just about to turn back to the couch when Stan began yelling, "I won't do it! You can't make me!" I knocked on the door announcing that I was coming in to check on him and not to be alarmed. The only response was murmuring and sobbing, so I slowly opened the door. Stan was lying in the fetal position in bed, repeating the same line over and over. "I won't do it." Stan was clearly distressed, and I asked if he would like his as-needed prescription sedative. At first he declined, but after a few minutes of soothing talk, he accepted the pill and fell back to sleep. Back to the couch in the darkened living room I went. Back to the ticking clock, the humming refrigerator, and the occasional passing car. The shuffling noise had stopped, and I had all but forgotten about the previous incident with Stan, when again I heard him yell. This time it was not words but a guttural scream, afraid that his outburst would wake the whole house and cause even more trouble for me. I ran to his room and threw open the door without knocking. Stan was no longer in bed. He was standing straight up with a look of pure horror on his face and a bedside lamp clutched in his hand. I was no fool, and I knew better than to try to restrain him. I calmly asked Stan what was bothering him and offered to help in any way that I could. Stan just stood there, gripping the lamp and staring directly at something invisible to me. Several minutes of cajoling worked, and I managed to get him to release the lamp and get into bed. Stan's demeanor changed. The electric energy he had been exuding had relaxed into tearful exhaustion. He begged me to check his room before I left. He wouldn't tell me what to look for. It was just something that shouldn't be there. After checking every square inch of the room, he sighed and fell asleep once more. I left the room amazed that Stan had that reaction considering the highly potent sedative he had taken just an hour prior. My watch said 4 in the morning. 3 more hours until my day shift relief person would arrive. Hopefully all would be peaceful until then. By 5 in the morning, the winter sky was still dark and residents were all still in their rooms. That's when I heard the strangest sound yet. I strained my ears once more to try and figure out what it was. At first, I heard the familiar shuffling. That was followed by some quiet groans and heavy breathing. After a few minutes, I heard what sounded like dripping. What could possibly be dripping? I checked every sink and shower. No faucets were dripping. Where was it coming from? That's when I turned the bend from one of the bathrooms to the hallway with Stan's bedroom. The dripping noise was definitely coming from that room. Had it been daytime, there is no way I would have heard it. However, the night shift was quiet, and each drop left a distinctive sound as it hit the hardwood floor. Quietly, I knocked on Stan's door. No answer. I then whispered, "Stan, are you up? Do you need some help with something?" No answer. I wrestled in my head whether or not to open the door. If he was asleep, I didn't want to wake him. He was so distressed earlier. He needed the sleep, and I didn't want the other residents to be disturbed. After some back and forth, I decided to let him be until med call at 7. The sun slowly rose and light began to fill the group home through the large living room window. My relief worker would be here soon. I just needed to dole out each resident's morning medications. I realized with a start that I could still hear the dripping sound. I must have tuned it out the past couple of hours. Maybe I did fall asleep on the couch after all. Curious, I walked back to Stan's room. Yes, the dripping was not my imagination. As far as I knew, the only liquid in the room was a small glass of water on the nightstand from when he took his pill the night before. But that small of an amount would certainly not still be dripping if it spilled 2 hours before. I quietly knocked and whispered to Stan again through the door, but there was no answer. As silently as I could, I opened the door a crack to peek inside. Stan was not in bed. I opened the door all the way. Stan was not to be found. There was only one place to hide in this room, the closet. Summoning all my courage, I slowly walked over to the closet and gripped the doorknob. The dripping could be heard even louder. I very slowly opened the door, revealing Stan sitting in darkness inside. As I turned on the closet light, the full horror of what I was seeing hit me. Blood rivulets were dripping from Stan's gouged eyes and ears. The droplets made a very distinctive sound as they hit the wooden floor. He was gripping a bloody pencil and smiling. Sensing my presence, he said, "I finally got them to stop. I finally got them to leave me alone," with fresh and drying blood covering his face and clothing. I was just about to help him out of the closet when I stopped in frozen fear. Not because of the terrible sight in front of me, but the unmistakable sound of shuffling right behind me. In 2021, everything in my life was shifting. That was the year my mom finally left my dad after years of fighting and stress that had quietly chewed holes in our family. She took 5 of us with her, I and my 4 younger siblings, and we moved across town into a small, creaky, 2-story apartment tucked away in a row of nearly identical buildings. My older sister stayed behind. She was already 18, and she had friends, a part-time job, and her own routines. She said she'd come visit, but it wasn't the same. The apartment wasn't much. Peeling beige walls, noisy pipes, and thin windows that let the cold in. But it felt like a new start, a small, fragile bubble of calm. It smelled like dust and fresh plastic for the first few weeks, and most of our stuff was still in boxes. The kitchen was cramped, the upstairs carpet stained and worn, but at least we were together. At least we were safe, or so I thought. It happened on a Thursday night. I remember because I had dance club the day before, and my legs still ached a little. The sun had set early and the shadows outside had grown long and soft, crawling over the sidewalk like spilled ink. My mom announced she had to run to the store. Just a quick trip to grab snacks and a few frozen meals. She was working late the next day and didn't want to leave us empty-handed. All my younger siblings begged to go with her. They always did. Even a short trip to the store was an adventure to them. I, on the other hand, wanted to stay. I was 11, old enough to feel independent, even if I still wasn't technically allowed to stay home alone. We didn't have much entertainment in the new place yet. No game consoles, no Wi-Fi, and my mom's computer was still packed in one of the unopened boxes. But the TV worked. That was enough. I wanted to sprawl on the couch and watch reruns of Full House. Pretend I had the place to myself for just one peaceful hour. Surprisingly, after a long pause and a glance toward the front door, my mom said yes. It felt like a rite of passage, my first real night alone, a tiny breath of freedom. They left, voices fading down the hallway. I locked the door, slid the chain latch in place, and turned the TV volume up just a little too loud. I sat curled up on the couch with a blanket, the glow of the screen warming the dark corners of the living room. I forgot for a moment how silent the rest of the apartment could be. We didn't have our pets with us yet. Our 2 dogs and 1 cat were still with my dad, waiting for our landlord to approve the paperwork for them to join us. The apartment felt weirdly hollow without them. No scratching at the door, no barking, no soft purring beside me on the couch. Just the muffled laughter of Uncle Jesse and DJ Tanner echoing through the room. Then I heard it, a creak sound from upstairs. It wasn't subtle. The floor above me gave a long, dragging groan, the kind of sound that floorboards make when someone steps on them. Not just wood shifting with the temperature, not a creaky pipe. It was the distinct sound of weight, then came the footsteps. I froze. My hand paused halfway to my popcorn bowl. My heart gave a single, hard thump in my chest. I glanced at the ceiling. The noise had come from above the living room, maybe the hallway between our bedrooms. My brain tried to reason with it. It's an old apartment, or probably just the neighbors moving around, I told myself. We'd heard them a few times already, especially late at night. The walls were paper thin. I told myself that was all it was and went back to watching the show. 15 seconds later, it happened again. Another creak, this time from my older brother's room. It wasn't like before. This one was heavier, slower, as if someone was stepping with care, trying not to be heard. I went rigid. A cold feeling spread through my chest and into my arms. My eyes darted to the front door, still locked. My mom and the others wouldn't be back for at least 20 minutes. The show played on, cheerful and oblivious. I barely heard it anymore. I got up quietly and tiptoed into the kitchen. My fingers trembled a little as I pulled open the drawer where we kept the knives. I grabbed the biggest one we had, long, silver, a little too heavy for my hand, and held it tight. I stood at the base of the stairs, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. The light from the living room didn't reach the staircase, and it looked like a tunnel, dark and silent. The air felt heavier now, still but charged, like the second before a thunderclap. My foot lifted to step onto the first stair, and then, I can't explain it, something inside me said no. It wasn't just fear, it was deeper, like a gut scream, a voice without sound that told me, don't go up there, do not go up there. I stepped back, slowly. I didn't take my eyes off the stairs as I backed into the living room and sat on the couch, knife still in hand. I stared at the hallway leading to the stairs for what felt like hours, every creak of the building setting my nerves on fire. After what felt like forever, I heard the front door rattle. My mom's voice called out, "We're back!" I jumped up and rushed to unlock the door, practically yanking them inside. My siblings ran in with bags of chips and juice, laughing about something one of them said in the car. I pulled my mom aside and told her everything. Her face softened into that look parents get when they think you're just being dramatic. "Sweetheart, the floors creak. The neighbors upstairs are loud. You're just imagining things." I wanted to argue, to make her understand that this wasn't just paranoia, but she was already brushing it off, setting down the groceries. Then my 8-year-old sister, small, stubborn, and far braver than me, snatched the knife from my hand. "I'll check," she said casually, like it was nothing. Before I could stop her, she was halfway up the stairs. I followed slowly, heart still hammering. She checked every room with the kind of confidence I could only dream of. Nothing. Empty. Then we opened my older brother's room. There, sitting on his bed, was an open bag of chips. That might not seem like a big deal, but in our family, there was one strict, non-negotiable rule. No food upstairs. Ever. My mom was a clean freak when it came to crumbs and bugs, and we all got yelled at just for leaving wrappers in our pockets. And yet, there it was. An open, half-eaten bag of chips. Not one of the new ones, a different brand. Slightly stale looking. We all swore on our mother that none of us had brought snacks up there. I felt cold again. That feeling came back, like ice in my chest. Still, my mom didn't make much of it. She mumbled something about someone sneaking them upstairs and forgetting, even though we all denied it. Life went on, but I never forgot that night. And a few days later, something happened that still makes me shiver. It was early spring. The days were longer, and I was starting to enjoy walking home from dance club on my own. I'd take the long route, past the bakery with the sweet rolls in the window, and the corner store that always had melted popsicles in the freezer bin. That day, as I turned onto our block, I saw flashing lights, red and blue, flickering against the beige apartment walls. It was a police car's. Yellow tape strung across one of the buildings a few doors down. People were gathered outside, whispering. I heard fragments of conversation like, broke in while the kid was alone. Nothing was taken. Must have been watching them. I stopped cold. Something in me knew. The pieces clicked in a way I didn't want them to. Someone had broken into an apartment while a kid was home alone. Just like I had been. Just like that night. I hurried home, head low, eyes darting to every shadow. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening. Every creak of the ceiling made me jump. Every gust of wind outside made me clutch my blanket tighter. I never stayed home alone again. And to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd gone up those stairs. If I had ignored that gut feeling and walked into my brother's room, knife in hand, would I have found someone? Would I have made it back down? I'm 13 now. It's been 2 years, but I remember every detail of that night as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Some things never leave you, especially when you're not sure you were really alone. It happened on a Sunday, a quiet, unremarkable Sunday in late fall, one of those days where the skies stay a little too gray, the air a little too still. My parents had taken my little brother to some community event, one of those festivals with food trucks and music and long parking lines. I wasn't interested. I was finally a teenager, and more importantly, I was finally old enough to stay home by myself. It felt like a milestone. The house was all mine, if only for a few hours. I didn't have to share the TV. No one would nag me about cleaning up. No one would tell me to get off my phone or lower my volume. The silence was a kind of freedom I hadn't known I needed. I remember the way the air felt in the living room, cool and soft, sun filtering through the blinds just enough to paint stripes across the hardwood floor. I sprawled on the couch, half watching YouTube videos, half scrolling through my phone. Time blurred. Everything felt simple and safe, but it didn't stay that way. Around mid-afternoon, I got a text from my best friend. "Wanna hang?" She lived only a few blocks away, and I didn't think twice. I was riding the high of independence, of rule-breaking disguised as maturity. My parents had said clearly, "Don't leave the house," but I shrugged it off. I figured if I got back before they did, no harm done. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my sneakers, and stepped outside. What I didn't do, what I still regret more than anything, was lock the front door behind me. My friend and I hung out for a couple hours, just walking the neighborhood, talking about nothing important. At the time, it felt worth it. It felt grown up. We sat on a park bench until the sky started to turn orange at the edges, and I realized I'd pushed my luck too far. I rushed back home, heart pounding, not from fear, but guilt. I was hoping my parents weren't already back, that I'd sneak in, flop back on the couch, and pretend I'd never left. But the moment I stepped through the front door, something felt off. The silence was too deep. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's expectant. Waiting. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Then I noticed that the cabinet under the sink, open. The hallway closet, wide open, coats shifted, as if someone had been rifling through them. One of the couch cushions on the floor. Things weren't where they were supposed to be. I froze in the living room, eyes darting across the house. My brain fought itself, trying to convince me that maybe I'd left things like this. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe my brother had done it before they left. But the longer I stood there, the stronger the feeling grew in my gut. Something was wrong. I did what every dumb character in horror movies does. I shouted into the house. "Hello!" My voice cracked, but silence. "Anyone here?" But nothing. No footsteps, no response. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft ticking of the clock above the fireplace. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to shake off the fear. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm being paranoid. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the fallen cushion. I pushed the closet shut. I even checked the back door. Locked. Maybe I just imagined it. And then my phone rang. I looked down. It's from unknown caller. Something about those two words, so simple, so ordinary, made my chest tighten. Curiosity mixed with unease. Part of me thought it was my mom calling from a different number. Another part of me hoped it was just a spam call. I answered. At first, there was silence. Then, breathing. Deep, heavy, raspy breathing. Not like someone panting, like someone trying to stay calm or stay hidden. My skin crawled. "Who is this?" I asked. No reply. Just more breathing. My voice sharpened. "Hello, who is this?" But then, click. They hung up. My heart was beating faster now, the tightness in my chest turning to dread. I stared at the screen like it would give me answers. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe it was nothing. 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. It's from same unknown caller in same heavy breathing. I said nothing this time. I just listened. Listened to the way the air moved through the speaker. There was something angry in the rhythm of it. Something patient. Like whoever was on the other end was enjoying the silence. "Seriously, who the hell is this?" I snapped, then clicked. Again, they hung up. I wanted to throw my phone. My nerves were fraying by the second. My brain began running through possibilities. Was it my brother playing a prank? Was it a scammer? A friend messing around? But no one knew I was home alone. No one except my friend. And I trusted her. Then came another call from same unknown caller. I hesitated and picked up. For a third time, the breathing. This time it sounded closer and louder. Then finally I heard the voice. In low and cold voice like a whisper, he said, "I'm in the house." Everything inside me froze. I didn't blink. I couldn't even breathe. My hands went numb around the phone. My knees buckled slightly, but I caught myself on the counter. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then the footsteps came from upstairs. Slow, methodical steps. Then running. The ceiling above me thundered like something had just leapt forward. A loud clatter, like something heavy had dropped. A drawer, maybe. A chair. Something knocked over in a hurry. So I didn't wait, and I bolted out the front door, barefoot, phone in hand, not even bothering to shut it behind me. I sprinted across the yard and into the woods behind our house. My lungs burned. Branches scratched at my arms. I didn't care. I kept running. I didn't stop until I was deep into the trees, hidden behind a thick trunk, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher answered. I told them everything in a blur. About the calls, the footsteps, the breathing, the voice. They promised someone would be there in minutes. It felt like hours. When the police arrived, I led them shakily back toward the house. I stayed behind as they entered. Flashlights scanned every corner. Radios crackled. Their footsteps echoed through the hallways. When they came out, one of the officers told me what they found. The door was wide open, he said. No sign of forced entry, but a few things were out of place. Drawers in the kitchen had been opened. One of the bedroom windows upstairs was cracked open, barely noticeable from the outside. But no one was there. Whoever it was, if someone really had been in the house, was gone, and they had left no trace. My parents were furious that I'd left the house, but their anger faded when they saw how shaken I was. My mom didn't let me out of her sight for days. My dad had a new security system installed before the week was over, but none of that fixed what had already happened. I kept thinking about that whisper. I'm in the house. The way it sounded too real, too deliberate. The breathing, the timing. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. I slept with the door locked, a chair pressed against the knob. I checked the windows 3 times before bed. They never caught whoever it was. Maybe it was a prank, a cruel, twisted joke, Or maybe someone really had been watching. Maybe they saw me leave. Maybe they knew I was home alone. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment. And maybe, just maybe, I got lucky. I'm older now. Smarter. I always lock the doors. I never ignore my gut. Some stories don't feel real until you're the one living them. Until the nightmare isn't on your screen. It's in your phone, in your apartment, in your best friend's voice at 11:20 p.m. I always believed monsters were easy to spot. They lurked in dark alleys or wore ski masks or had mugshots buried in some criminal database. But I was wrong. Sometimes they show up dressed well, carrying wine and home-cooked meals. Sometimes they have perfect smiles and charming Tinder bios. And sometimes they never leave a trace behind. Friday night was nothing special. The weather was humid. My window was cracked open. I was curled on the couch in sweatpants, barely paying attention to some background TV noise. It was one of those evenings where everything feels safe, familiar, still. Emily had other plans. She'd matched with a guy on Tinder earlier that week. Daniel, supposedly 29, lived nearby, said all the right things. He didn't push for anything weird. No late-night texts, no red flags, at least not on the surface. He asked if she'd like to come over for dinner that night. He wanted to cook for her. She said yes. She'd sent me the address, a short-term rental in a good neighborhood. It looked clean, upscale, nothing sketchy. She kept her location on, just like I asked. Everything felt normal. She even checked in that evening, said the place was beautiful, the food smelled amazing, and he'd gone all out with candles and music. Steak, sausages, a few side dishes that sounded like something from a restaurant menu. She sounded happy, comfortable. By all appearances, it was just another date with someone who tried a little harder than most. Hours passed. Around 11:20 p.m., I got a call from her. It was short, disjointed. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming or vomiting. Her breathing was erratic and she was panicked, more afraid than I'd ever heard her. She couldn't finish her sentences. Something about pain, her stomach, vomiting, blood. That's all I needed to hear. I called emergency services immediately and gave them her location. I was already pulling on my shoes when the dispatcher confirmed help was on the way. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital. By the time I arrived, she'd already been rushed into a room. There's a special kind of stillness in emergency rooms at night. The flickering fluorescent lights, the cold seats, the faint beeping of machines behind thin curtains. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing through 1,000 impossible scenarios. A doctor eventually approached. His tone was clinical, almost too calm. Emily was stable. They were running tests. They'd collected a sample from her vomit to check for toxins or allergens. And then, something about her stomach contents didn't align with anything routine. He mentioned trace elements in the meat she had consumed, proteins that didn't match any livestock. Not pork, not beef, not poultry, not game. Then he said it. Human, not directly, not dramatically. But his words carried the weight of something that shouldn't happen outside of horror films. I couldn't process it at first. A human meat? I asked him to repeat himself, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the answer didn't change. When Emily was conscious again, she confirmed everything. He'd made the meal himself, said it was a family recipe. He'd plated it beautifully. Medium rare steak, handmade sausage, seasoned vegetables. She said the food was delicious, rich, heavy, but not in a way that set off alarm bells. She'd eaten most of it before the pain started. At first it was nausea, then cramps, then something deeper, like her insides were turning against her. The vomiting started shortly after, and that's when she saw blood. Everything else blurred after that. The police got involved right away. They went to the apartment, only to find it empty, no sign of the man Emily had described. The place had already been wiped down. Not thoroughly, but efficiently. The dishes had been rinsed. The garbage had been taken out. No clothing in the closet, no toiletries in the bathroom. It was as if he'd never lived there at all, which it turned out he hadn't. The apartment was a short-term Airbnb, rented under a false name, using a prepaid card and an email that was deleted minutes after the booking was confirmed. There were no fingerprints, no digital footprint. Even the Tinder profile vanished the same night. Deleted or deactivated, no way to tell. But the food remained. In the refrigerator, they found more meat, wrapped in butcher paper, some raw, some partially cooked. Samples were taken and tests later confirmed the unthinkable. It was human flesh. Multiple donors, gender undetermined. The investigation stalled from there. There was no paper trail, no DNA on file. The security cameras from the building were useless. He kept his face turned, wore a hat, never looked directly into the lens. His profile photo from Tinder was no help either. Facial recognition turned up nothing. It may not have even been a real person. AI-generated images had become so convincing, there was no way to confirm whether Daniel ever truly existed. He was a phantom with perfect teeth and just the right amount of stubble, the kind of face that put people at ease. Whoever he was, he had done this before. That became clear as more reports trickled in. Similar cases in other cities, victims who vanished after dates, others who were found in hospitals with no idea what they had eaten. The police believed he traveled, rented properties for short periods, used different names, changed his appearance, moved on before anyone could catch up. He left no patterns, no motive, no manifesto, just bodies. Sometimes whole, sometimes not. Emily survived. The poison, or whatever it was, didn't cause lasting physical damage. But something inside her broke that night. She didn't talk much after. Not about what happened, not about dating, not about anything that reminded her of him. She stopped eating meat entirely, couldn't stand the smell of it. Couldn't stand restaurants. Couldn't even look at food that looked too rich or too rare. For weeks, she didn't sleep. Every noise felt like a threat. As for me, I deleted every dating app on my phone. I couldn't trust them anymore. Not after realizing how easy it was for someone to lie, to smile, to plan a dinner designed not to impress, but to trap. People think horror is ghosts, demons, curses, but real horror is slower, colder, more human. Real horror is your best friend calling you because her insides are tearing apart from a meal she thought was made with love. The worst part, we still don't know who he was, and we probably never will. The man who cooked my friend human flesh walked away without leaving a footprint. No name, no identity, no consequence. He's out there, somewhere, maybe using another name, another face, another apartment rented for a few nights at a time, cooking for someone else. Right now, he could be chatting with another woman, or man, or couple, telling them he's a chef, that he loves old recipes, that he wants to impress them with something personal. And unless they ask the right questions, unless they notice something, anything, he'll serve them just like he served Emily, carefully, elegantly, and with the kind of patience that only monsters have. Just a little information for you all before I tell my story. My job is to find missing people. Families and police stations usually call me and others like myself to find said people. Over the course of my career, I've found quite a few people, but some I've never been able to find. Despite that, I took pride in my job because I could find and help people. But after this case, I haven't been the same. I will warn those with weak stomachs that what I am about to say isn't suited for some. A few years back, I was contacted by a family I'm friends with. They were searching for their missing daughter and her two friends. They had gone on a cross-country road trip. A week into their road trip, all contact between them and their families was cut off. The families went to the local police, but there wasn't much they could do, so they turned to me. The case was somewhat personal, so to say I was impatient to find them was an understatement. I first had the families pull up their messages between them and their children. I had to cover every base, from them wanting to run away from home to someone wanting to harm them. I got the license plate to the car they took and ran it through multiple databases to find it in any CCTVs along the roads they took. I got a ping that the car was seen at a gas station a few states over. The gas station was on a long, desolate road. The road itself wasn't in the best condition, and the gas station didn't look all that good. Upon showing the clerk at the gas station their pictures, he confirmed that he had seen him. They looked fine at the time and were headed west. I thanked him and followed the road westwards. While driving down the road, my tire went out and I crashed into the side railings. Thankfully, I didn't sustain any injuries, but I was now stranded in the middle of nowhere. I decided to survey the area and noticed that the trees looked damaged. The sun was setting, so I grabbed my flashlight and peeked over the edge of the railings. Perhaps the car went off into the gully. I placed the flashlight in my chest pocket and climbed down the hill. At the bottom of the hill lay a wrecked car. The car looked so heavily damaged that they shouldn't have been able to get out, but somehow there was no one inside. Though dried and nearly concealed by foliage, there were some blood splotches. I went to my radio to call for some police officers and an ambulance, but to my dismay, all I got was static. A twig snapped behind me, and before I had the chance to turn around, something hard connected with my head, and I found my vision go dark and my mind blank. I woke up in near-pitch darkness, except for the light bulb that hung above me. My head throbbed painfully. What the hell happened? Assessing my condition, I was strapped to a chair with my legs and arms firmly bound. Based on my surroundings, I assumed I was in a basement. It smelled of rot and mold, and I struggled to not throw up. I could hear rats scurrying around just out of my line of sight. A door opened, and in walked a man who was so mutated, it was hard to say he was even human. "Hey, who the hell are you?" I shouted. He came closer, and I could see a horrible grin plastered on his face. He held a knife in one hand. "You're the one who took those 3 girls, weren't you? What did you do to them?" I asked. He didn't respond, but he had a displeased look on his face. Before I knew it, he stabbed the knife into my hand. My body jolted from the pain, and I wanted to scream out in agony, but I held it in. "You sick bastard. You probably get off to this, huh? Well, hate to break it to you, but it'll take more than that to make me scream," I retorted through heavy breaths. He tilted his head and began twisting the knife in my hand. The pain was unbearable, but I refused to give him what he wanted. I couldn't help the tears that built up in my eyes and quickly fell. He was still dissatisfied, so he pulled the knife from my hand. He placed it over my pinky, lining it up. I struggled against my binds as I knew what he was about to do. However, before I could protest, he slammed the knife down and severed my pinky from my hand. I couldn't hold my screams any longer. "Son of a bitch! Go to hell, you motherfucker!" I screamed in agony. I heard his sick laugh echo throughout the basement, and he said, "Got you! I'll be taking this." Just like that, he picked up my finger and left me in the basement to suffer alone in agony. The pain clouded my brain and made it hard to think straight. Blood still poured from my hand, coating the chair arm before dripping to the floor. After what felt like hours, I passed out from the pain and blood loss. I woke up once more and saw that my hand was bandaged with a dirty cloth. I looked up to see a horrific sight. In front of me sat a table with human body parts laid on it. The body parts were so mutilated, you almost couldn't tell it belonged to a person. I gagged at the sight. "He's a cannibal?" In his hands were a bowl and spoon. He was stirring the spoon in the bowl and turned towards me. Upon seeing I was awakened, he came over to me. The smell was putrid, and I could feel my stomach turning at the sight of the contents of the bowl. I turned away, but he grabbed my face and forced my mouth open. He shoved the spoon in my mouth. It was horrible and tears filled my eyes. I spit the contents back out and vomited. He looked unhappy that I didn't eat it. He set the bowl down and walked over to a wall, which held multiple tools. He grabbed some pliers and came back over to me. "What are you gonna do?" I asked, breathless. He didn't answer as he pulled off 3 of my fingernails. Tears fell from my eyes and I screamed. His smile widened and he laughed his creepy, sick laugh. "You son of a b***!" I yelled. He didn't mind me and simply grabbed my fingernails, leaving me alone once more. Blood dripped from my fingertips. I hung my head low from exhaustion. Just how long have I been here? Out of sheer desperation, I moved my injured hand, and much to my surprise, it was easier to move than my other hand, perhaps due to the blood that coated it. I twisted and turned my hand slowly, releasing it from its bindings a little at a time. My hand and arm ached from the tight pull of the bindings, but after what felt like forever, my hand was free. I panted from the pain and held my hand close to my chest to relieve some of the pain. I then released my other hand and feet from the bindings. I rushed for the door, but it was locked. I searched around the basement, the dim light of the bulb being my only salvation. In one of the corners, I found a flashlight in a box. I flipped it on and was able to see considerably better. The basement floor was covered in old blood stains and rotten pieces of flesh, presumably human flesh. I dry heaved and focused on finding a weapon I could use. Unfortunately, whenever he left, he took his tools he had on the wall with him. I searched around and miraculously found a crowbar he left behind. I unscrewed the light bulb from its socket and fell into total darkness except for the light from the flashlight. I hid in a concealed area behind the door and waited for him to come back. After a while, I heard heavy footsteps and readied myself in the encompassing darkness. The metal door screeched open and he stepped into the basement. Perhaps due to the unexpected darkness in the once poorly lit basement, he paused. I used that to my advantage and swung the crowbar as hard as I could against the back of his head. He grunted and fell over. I ran up the stairs, tripping over some uneven boards, and came out into an old rundown and decrepit house. I rushed through the house and barged through the front door. I ran into the chilly night air. I could hear sounds from within the house and dread filled me. How was he up already? I ran blindly through the woods, tripping over tree roots and slipping on leaves covered in dew. I stepped on something cold and metallic, and before I had time to react, it clamped down on my leg. The bear trap broke my leg in several places, and I screamed as I fell over, blood pouring from my leg. I could hear movement in the woods from the direction I had come from. I knew it was him. I pried the trap open and thankfully got my leg out. My leg was messed up beyond belief. It was mangled and I could barely stand on it. The noise got closer, so I forced myself to run. This, however, didn't work, and he appeared right behind me and tackled me down. He had an ice pick and was trying to stab me with it. I struggled with him and managed to knock it out of his hands. I kneeled him in the gut, which released his hold on me, and I scrambled for the ice pick. He grabbed my mangled leg and dragged me back to him. I yelled in pain as he flipped me over and began strangling me. I couldn't breathe and felt my consciousness slipping as I blindly grabbed for the ice pick. I felt the cool metal and saw a ray of hope. I grabbed it in my hand and with one swift movement stabbed it into his neck. He fell back onto the ground, making a gurgling noise. I struggled up and continued limping onwards. I soon found a dirt road which led me to the highway. I collapsed on the side of the highway just as a car spotted me and pulled over. The person rushed to me as I succumbed to the darkness. I don't know much of what happened after that, but I woke up in a hospital a few days later. I was told that I was probably held in that basement for about 4 to 5 days. I was told I had gotten lucky, but I didn't really feel like I had. Everything that happened broke me. How could I tell those families what had really happened to their children? For months after everything happened, I still couldn't stand the smell or sight of meat. In the end, I wasn't able to tell them. A police officer who arrived at the scene had to. This case really fucked me up mentally and physically. I walked with a limp and relied on a cane. Mentally, I was even more screwed up. I could longer stand being near sharp objects, being in dark places, and I could no longer perform my job properly. I quit once I got well enough to go out and about. I'd like to say that somehow I'll get over this, but even after 4 years, I haven't mentally recovered from it. I'm not sure why I decided to share this. Maybe I just needed to let it out. But stay safe nonetheless, everyone. I work at a gas station in a forgettable little town in Illinois, about 5 hours south of Chicago. When I was a kid, I never thought I'd end up working the graveyard shift 5 nights a week, 100 feet from the off-ramp. I always dreamed of being a firefighter or a teacher, maybe even playing guitar in a rock band. But by your late 30s, you start to realize the difference between dreams and reality. I don't know whether it was my own bad luck or my inability to stick with college, but I was stuck working from 9 at night to 5 in the morning for my paycheck. You meet a lot of interesting people in my line of work. Maybe interesting isn't the best word. I'll just say there's a lot of characters roaming around at 2 in the morning. To tell the truth, I like the night shift. It's slower and I get paid an extra 75 cents an hour. Though I haven't been robbed yet, and I'm sure looking down the barrel of a gun would change my tune. I have my regulars, and I've come to enjoy their company. Mostly. Some I could do without. There's Scratchy. I don't know his real name, but he comes in around 11 nearly every night to buy $10 worth of instant lottery tickets. There's Mrs. Fletcher. She lives down the block and rolls up on one of those mobility scooters every week to get milk and cat food. Nice old lady. Made me a plate of cookies last Christmas. One of my favorites was Steve, and not because he was a great conversationalist. He wasn't as far as I knew. I only know him from his name tag on his McDonald's uniform. He sometimes rolled in around 3:30 in the morning to get gas before his 4 o'clock shift. Whenever I saw good old Steve, I knew it wasn't long before I got to go home. Those are some of the nicer ones I get to interact with. Now let me tell you about one of the nasty ones. It was a Wednesday morning in early spring, I think. I was reading a horror anthology. King, Bradbury, Bloch. The usual suspects. An oldie but a goodie turned off Main Street and rolled up to the entrance. That's what I call classic cars. I always liked older cars, and since I started working here, I would often glance through the many hot rod magazines we sold. I recognized it immediately. A 1978 Diamond Jubilee Edition Thunderbird, all black with tinted windows. A tall man with pale drooping features stepped out. If I had to guess his profession from how he was dressed, I would say something like funeral director. A black suit jacket hung from his rigid frame. I noticed mud on his shoes and the hem of his slacks. I nodded and mumbled, "Hello." He walked to the aisles, ignoring my greeting as if I didn't even exist. He brought a box of garbage bags, a roll of duct tape, our biggest size bottle of Clorox bleach, and a hacksaw to the counter. And yes, we sell hacksaws. You'll find them between the ratchet sets and the shot glasses. I make it a rule not to think too hard about what people buy. It's none of my business unless it's an underage kid trying to buy booze or wannabe meth maker trying to buy up all our cold medicine or nail polish remover. The old guy's selection was suspicious, but suspicion and guilt are two different things. It wasn't until I rung him up that I got that uneasy feeling that comes so easily to someone who works alone late into the night. He pulled a small red purse from under his jacket and rifled through it. A long, uncomfortable moment later, he pulled out two $20 bills to pay for his stuff. I glanced at the purse in his hand and noticed a woman's driver's license amongst the jumble of items within. That wasn't really strange. Married couples often co-op each other's wallets, checkbooks, debit cards, and various other devices used for payment. It all went toward the family's needs anyway, but his two perceptive eyes caught mine looking. I counted his change, then handed it to him. He smiled, but it seemed more like he was baring his teeth. For whatever reason, he reminded me of a predatory animal gloating over wounded prey. "Your name is Jimmy?" he asked. The accent was something I had never heard in real life, only in movies or television. It was something Eastern European, very thick too. "Yes," I replied. "Let me bag this up." I bagged it, then pushed it across the counter. "You work alone at night, do you?" he asked. I got panicked and said nothing. He smiled again and left by saying, "See you around, Jimmy." I was glad he was gone. I hoped I would never see him again. Some people just make your skin crawl, and I'll be damned if could really tell you why. It wasn't his transaction, but his presence. Does that make sense? I'll admit it doesn't. Maybe I shouldn't read horror stories when I get bored at work. As my manager likes to say, if you got time for leaning, you got time for cleaning. 2 nights later, I found myself grabbing the local paper. I saw a woman's face. The story was brief. She had left a bar 2 towns down the highway a couple nights earlier. She never got home. I didn't know this woman, but my mind insisted that I'd seen her face before. But the mind plays tricks. I see a lot of faces. Who am I to make a fuss without something better than a fleeting look at a woman's face on a driver's license? Spring turned to summer, and sometime in late June, I had another visit from the man in the black Thunderbird. This time I knew I had seen something I shouldn't have. He walked inside stoically and made his way to the bathrooms in the back. I noticed his hands were coated in something red. I wanted to tell myself it was ketchup or maybe paint, but I knew it was blood. Tiny scarlet drops fell to the floor, creating an intermittent trail leading to the back of the gas station. I considered running to my forest green Cavalier accentuated with Bondo and rust, but I choked down the rising terror, telling myself no one could be so audacious as to partake in a foul deed then walk in public with blood-soaked hands. I reasoned that he must have injured himself, right? What murderer in his right mind would walk around with bloody hands for the world to witness? But murderers aren't in the right frame of mind. And is a gas station at 3 in the morning really that public? No one had been in for nearly 2 hours. I heard the bathroom door open and my whole body tensed. I stared, paralyzed by the man's approach. Now his hands were clean and wet with water from the sink, but his face was decorated in thin lines of red that radiated out from the corner of his lips. He grabbed the local paper in the USA Today and tossed them on the counter. I must have stared too long. He dabbed his cheek delicately, then inspected the red spot on his finger. "I suffer from gum disease, Jimmy." Hadn't he seen the blood around his lips? The fluorescent light in the bathroom is bright, almost overbearing, and there's 2 mirrors, one above the sink and a full-length mirror next to the little machine that sells cologne and condoms. He paid, then went outside. He placed the newspapers on the roof of his T-Bird, then stood to peer into the night as if contemplating something. I watched him stand there for at least 5 minutes, watching the sky and occasionally sneering with his blood-smeared mouth. Then his body snapped into action, turning to rush back into the building. The automatic doors opened. I saw his face, but his animalistic smile was missing. He bared his teeth. I saw large canines set in his mouth like tiny white daggers. Before he could step inside, a SUV sped into the parking lot. The man in black retreated to his T-Bird, started the car, and drove into the night. I was never so glad to see a group of drunk club hoppers in my entire life. There's only one bar in the county that stays open until 4 in the morning. There had been an ordinance proposed to restrict last call to midnight throughout the county. It was voted down. If it hadn't, I wonder if I would be alive to tell the story. They were a slightly obnoxious group. I think one of the guys stole a candy bar. The women stared into the screens of their iPhones while I rung up their transactions. I wished them good night. They walked out not saying a word. They were my best customers of the night. In the parking lot were the bloody man's newspapers. All summer and into the fall, I wondered if he was reading up on the people who went missing that summer. There were at least 2 in my part of Illinois, but people go missing all the time in America. All over the world, really. Most of them disappear for good. I kept an eye out for the man in the black Thunderbird, but I haven't seen him again. However, something last night got my attention. I was reading Dante's Inferno. Scary stuff. Steve had been by to get $10 in gas before his shift. I was looking forward to breakfast and sleep. I saw something move in the alley across the street. It was a long black car with its lights off. The kind they don't make anymore. It could have been a Mercury Cougar or Lincoln Continental, maybe even a Thunderbird. I would have quit this job long ago, but where would I have gone? I've got to pay the rent. I should be cleaning the bathrooms right now or doing inventory, but I bought Bram Stoker's Dracula today. Think I'll read a few chapters first. No hurry, really. The place is really dead tonight. I've told this story probably over 100 times, and despite being the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, I've come to appreciate that makes for a great story, so I figure I'll share it with you all here. I should start by saying that I always hated going camping. My parents sent me to summer camp every year in Colorado, which involved at least one camping trip into the woods. Despite the brevity of these trips, I always resented them. The heavy bag, the lack of toilets, the spiders that always found their way into my tent. When I turned 16 and became a camp counselor in training, however, my distaste for the whole experience briefly changed. At that age, we were only a few years older than the oldest campers, but we were given considerable leeway in what we were allowed to do. Most nights we would have to stay in the cabin with our campers, but it was rumored that the camping trip was a time where the counselors in training would get drunk, smoke weed, and hook up with each other after everyone else went to sleep. What I didn't know, however, was that the events of that camping trip would dissuade me from ever going camping in the woods again. The trip began as any other. Altogether, there were around 30 people on the trip, 4 counselors in training, 4 counselors, and around 20 or so boys and girls between the ages of 13 to 14. Walking in a single file line up and down the various trails, you could hardly hear any sounds of nature over the conversations and laughter of the campers. Several hours went by and we made our way through a dense, marshy area and up a steep incline populated with evergreens and aspens. I wasn't the most athletic kid, so it was around this point that I found myself at the back of the line with one of the other counselors in training, Jordan, as well as two campers who were also struggling to keep up. The four of us started chatting, and in our distracted state, we began to fall more and more behind the rest of the campers until the last of them faded out of view around a bend about 50 feet up the way. Unconcerned, we kept walking at the same slow pace, but after 30 minutes or so, the trail started to level off and I began to feel increasingly anxious. Not only had the rest of the group disappeared ahead of us, but we had entered a stretch of completely dead evergreens, half of which looked scorched by a wildfire, and the other half appeared to have been killed by a disease. The eeriness of the landscape was punctuated by a small derelict cabin sitting in the middle of the scorched forest, but seemingly untouched by the fire that must have spread through the area. We were so enraptured by the scene that one of the campers screamed when a twig broke behind us. Jordan and I started laughing a bit, but we quickly stopped when we turned to look at where the sound had come from. Not 20 feet behind us was a haggard-looking man with a messy nest of black hair and a long black beard slowly making his way up the trail with his eyes locked on us. He didn't appear to have any hiking supplies on him, and we had no idea how long he had been walking behind us. Being young, we were naturally pretty freaked out, but Jordan managed to give the guy a slight wave before saying to the rest of us, "Come on, let's speed up and get back with the rest of the group." As we turned to continue our way up the path, the man mumbled a question that was hard to hear, and I was shocked when Jordan turned around to ask the man to repeat himself. The man muttered again, slightly louder, "Going camping?" Jordan answered the man that, "Yes, we are going camping." To which the man smiled slightly before stating in a creepy and ominous voice, "Better be careful." We nodded and gave a half-hearted "thank you" before continuing on to try to find the rest of the group, this time with a much faster pace. Although the man had been walking up the same trail as us when we saw him, he didn't continue, but instead just stood there in the middle of the trail watching us, as made our way up the winding path and disappeared from his view. Finally, we managed to catch up to the rest of the group who had been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the man. They just shrugged it off, telling us that the guy probably lived in that cabin and just wanted to know what we were doing near his property. Still, I felt unnerved by the encounter, and when we finally arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had somehow followed us. Eventually, though, I put it out of my mind and managed to enjoy myself a bit. Everyone else had gone to bed, and Jordan and the other counselor in training from the boys' cabin had brought 2 warm Mike's Harders that they had stolen from the counselors' quarters, and I took out a joint I had stashed away for this exact occasion. To avoid getting in trouble, we decided to hike out into the woods a bit to smoke the joint, and we made our way to the edge of the river where we had washed our pots and pans earlier in the day. The spot was eerily silent, and the thought of the man from earlier kept popping into my head. Assuming that I was cold, not anxious, Jordan gave me his blue hoodie, and this prompted one of the other girls to suggest that we switch tents for the night so I could sleep in the same tent with him, and she could sleep in the same tent as the other boy. I had absolutely no problem with this, and after smoking the joint, we made our way back to our tents, which were pitched slightly away from the others, and we discreetly sipped on the Mike's Harders while telling scary camping stories. Some time passed, and one of the boys was in the middle of telling a rather muddled story that he was clearly making up on the spot when he suddenly stopped. In the silence, we could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching on pine needles about 40 feet away, near one of the other campers' tents. As we strained to listen to what was going on, the noises stopped, and even though we assumed it was just one of the campers getting up to go to the bathroom being stoned and hopped up from the scary stories, we decided to call it a night and go hide in our tents. Jordan followed suit, and we awkwardly made out before eventually going to sleep. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been quite late when I suddenly woke up to the distinct sounds of footsteps walking around near my tent. Shot with adrenaline, I tried to lay as still as possible and quiet my breathing. From the sound, it was apparent that someone was less than 3 feet away from the front of my tent, seemingly pacing back and forth. I turned to wake up Jordan, but I was immediately put at ease when I saw that he wasn't next to me. Assuming Jordan was the one I had been hearing, I closed my eyes and I was just beginning to drift back to sleep when I heard the tent unzip. I felt Jordan lie down next to me, and after a few moments he put his arms around me and began to spoon me. After nearly drifting off to sleep again, I realized I had to go to the bathroom and muttered something about having to go pee before beginning to unzip my sleeping bag. Seemingly annoyed by the noise, Jordan lazily turned over, pulling his hoodie up over his head before going still again. Quietly, so as not to wake him, I unzipped the tent and quickly scanned the campsite for any movement. Comforting myself that Jordan had just gone pee and was fine, I put my shoes on and began making the trek across our campsite to the designated pee zone. I had just made it to the area and pulled my pants down when I heard rustling coming from the campsite, as if someone was rummaging through our supplies and bags. Still slightly drunk, I tried to pull my pants up, and in my haste, I lost my balance and tried to catch myself with a branch that made a loud snapping noise when I grabbed it. I tried to gather myself as quietly as I could, but when I finally managed to look up, I could see that there was a figure making its way across our campsite in my direction. Before I could even think, I was blinded by the bright light of a flashlight shining directly into my eyes. And the light was getting bigger, so, whoever it was, they were coming toward me. Frozen and panicked, the figure got 10 feet away from me before I heard Jordan's voice say, "Sorry, it's just me." I breathed a sigh of relief, but then Jordan asked me something that really confused me. "Have you seen my blue hoodie? I know you gave it back to me, but I think one of campers might have stolen it from my bag while I was sleeping." After a brief pause, I managed to stutter out, "But you were just wearing it when you got back in the tent." What he said next made my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" he said. "It's been missing since we got back from the river. I even went down there to see if I had left it by accident. But after I couldn't find it, I thought I'd check the boys' bags, and that's when I saw you." My confusion quickly turned to sheer terror as I realized that the man who got into the tent with me just moments prior hadn't been Jordan. Sensing that something was wrong, Jordan asked me what happened, and I managed to get out that whoever stole his hoodie was sleeping in our tent. Not believing me, Jordan insisted on walking back to the tent to check it out. As slowly and quietly as possible, we made our way to the side of the tent, and when Jordan flipped on his flashlight and shined it through the nylon lining, he let out a high-pitched scream. We could both see the clear outline of a man's shadow lying still inside our tent. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but we ran to the pod of tents on the other side of the campground where the older counselors were sleeping and frantically unzipped their tent and started yelling for them to come out and that there was a man in our tent. I remember panic setting in as our counselors slowly and groggily woke up, but after a bit more frantic yelling, they finally managed to understand the severity of the situation when a commotion broke out on the other side of camp near our tent. By the time they ran to the scene, however, they only found an unzipped tent and a bunch of our things littered on the ground that the man had apparently knocked over or thrown during his escape. After that, we heard the counselors radioing back down to the camp to call the police, and we could tell that they were as scared as we were. I don't think any of us slept after that. Luckily, we only had to wait a few hours for the sun to come up, and by that time, a few of the other counselors had arrived with guns to escort us back to camp. On our way back down, one of the campers found Jordan's jacket tied around one of the trees on the path like some kind of marker. Needless to say, he didn't want the hoodie back, and we just left it there. To this day, I can't say for certain that the man in the tent was the same guy that we ran into earlier on the trail, but his face, and that night, still haunt me. When I was a kid, our family lived in a lonely house deep in the forest, surrounded by dense trees that whispered whenever the wind passed through them, the kind of place that made your bones feel cold even on warm days. Our neighbors' houses were technically within walking distance, but hidden behind thickets of pine and oak trees, making it feel like we were truly alone. During the day, the place felt peaceful, picturesque even, but at night it transformed into something else entirely. There was no city glow, no streetlights, just blackness. Pitch black silence that crept up against the windows like a living thing. The only light you could sometimes see came from a distant neighbor's window, like a dying star in a vast dark sky. That single dot of light did nothing to push back the darkness. It just reminded you that you were alone. Everyone in the area whispered about our house. Some avoided even driving past it at night. Stories floated around about how people who visited felt watched or suffered strange misfortunes afterward. My parents, being from another country and more skeptical by nature, dismissed the rumors. But curiosity eventually got the best of them. One day they invited a medium to examine the house. She didn't even cross the threshold. The moment she stepped out of her car and stood on our front lawn, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her face went pale and her hands trembled slightly. Then, without taking a single step forward, she turned to my parents and said, "This place, it's like a highway for things that don't belong in this world." She refused to go any closer. That was enough to leave a lingering shadow over my thoughts for years to come. One weekend night, when I was maybe 12 or 13, I decided to stay up late. My parents were watching an old movie from their homeland, something in a language I didn't fully understand. I didn't mind. I had grown up here, in the stillness of the forest, and while I didn't share their nostalgia, I appreciated their calm. When they finally headed off to bed, the house grew even quieter. I turned on my computer, the blue screen briefly lighting up my face. I remember playing the Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, diving into fantasy and magic, anything to escape the suffocating silence of the forest night. I played as a magic user, conjuring fire and bending the world to my will. It was comforting, in a way, pretending I had control. Eventually, tiredness began to tug at my eyes. I shut the game down and began watching a movie, letting the screen's glow flicker softly against the walls. That's when I heard it, a noise, faint at first but growing clearer. It sounded like running. Someone sprinting outside. But the steps weren't human. The rhythm was all wrong. Too fast, too mechanical. My heart skipped a beat. I paused the movie, holding my breath, and listened. The footsteps were circling the house, moving too quickly for any person. They weren't heavy like a moose trampling through the underbrush, nor graceful like a deer. It was like something pretending to sound like a person running. The uncanny imitation made it worse. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, abruptly with no slowdown. It had stopped, right at the main door. Now, to understand how terrifying that is, you have to know the layout of our house. The main door opens into a small entranceway. From there, a hallway stretches in, with stairs leading up to the second floor. To the left is a door that leads into the living room, where I was now sitting. I had a window beside me that faced the front yard and the main door. I turned to the window slowly, every hair on my neck standing on end. I pressed my face against the glass and peered into the inky blackness outside, but nothing. Just void. The trees outside stood still like tall shadows, as though holding their breath. Then came a new sound, this one stranger, more grotesque. It was like crows, but not quite. Crows don't talk, not in this way. This wasn't mindless cawing. It was more rhythmic, more structured, almost like speech. I turned off the movie completely and focused, trying to make out what was being said. I leaned forward, straining my ears. The sound continued, raspy voices, almost like whispers, conversing in some guttural language I couldn't understand. I caught none of the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. They were talking, like they were having a conversation just outside my door. Then it stopped. Just as I felt I was on the verge of understanding, the voices went dead silent. My stomach sank. It was as if they realized I was listening. A cold rush of dread swept over me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The silence now was worse than the noise. Then came a new sound. Footsteps. Not outside, but inside. They were slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. These were footsteps in the hallway, inside our house. The front door had never opened. I knew it hadn't. Yet something was walking in the entrance hallway, just beyond the door that separated it from the living room. I stood up slowly, paralyzed with fear. My legs barely moved, like my muscles had turned to stone. I stared at the door that led to the hallway. The footsteps approached, and they stopped right at the door, separating me from it. I stood there trembling, praying I wouldn't hear the doorknob turn, but the door never opened. Instead, the footsteps turned slowly and began walking again, this time toward the stairs. Each step up the wooden staircase was louder than the last. The air felt thick, suffocating. I could barely swallow. The house, already quiet, felt dead now, like it had been swallowed by a void. The thing walked all the way to the second floor. Then the sound stopped. But I wasn't safe. The footsteps resumed, now directly above me. I could hear each board creak as it moved around the second floor hallway. I knew that layout too well. There was only one room directly above the living room. It was now standing above me. I stared at the ceiling and my heart is hammering. Then it began to move again. Slow, steady, toward the room next door, which was my parents' bedroom. I heard the soft click of their door opening. The sound was painfully gentle, like someone being careful not to wake anyone. My pulse was a jackhammer now. Then silence. Complete, absolute, unnatural silence. No footsteps, no whispers, not even wind outside. It was as if the entire house had gone numb. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, afraid to sit, afraid to move, waiting for the sound of a scream, or worse, the sound of that door downstairs opening behind me. But nothing came, and that was it. The rest of the night passed in utter, suffocating silence. That was just one night. In that house, surrounded by ancient forest and long-forgotten secrets, experiences like this weren't rare. This wasn't a one-off story I tell at parties. Things like this happen often. Sometimes it was footsteps. Other times it was shadows darting through doorways or waking up with the feeling of someone standing beside your bed. I never used to pay much attention to the sounds in our apartment. At 17 years old, with no job and a sleep schedule that was more of a vague suggestion than a routine, the days and nights blended together in a haze of video games, energy drinks, and half-finished homework. The apartment always had this particular smell, stale takeout mixed with the faint chemical lemon of my mom's cleaning products. The walls were thin enough that I could hear Mrs. Henderson next door yelling at her cats every morning at 7:15 sharp. My mom worked long shifts at the hospital, her scrubs perpetually wrinkled, dark circles permanently etched under her eyes. She'd leave before dawn most days, the scent of cheap hospital coffee lingering in her wake. My older brother Gabe either locked himself in his makeshift room, really just a mattress behind a curtain in what should have been our dining area, or disappeared for hours to fish at the lake. His space always smelled like sweat and old socks, with fishing lures scattered across the floor like metallic confetti. We weren't that close, not since the fight last year, the one that ended with me smashing his Xbox controller against the wall and him telling me I was a waste of space. The dent was still there, hidden behind a crooked family photo. That afternoon started like any other. I was slumped in my gaming chair, the leather sticking to my bare arms in the summer heat, when I first heard it. "Noah!" Zrenia, it was Mom's voice. Clear, familiar, coming from down the hall. The same impatient tone she used when she wanted me to take out the trash or fetch something from her room. I didn't answer right away, too focused on headshotting zombies in my game. The blue light from my monitor reflected off the empty energy drink cans littering my desk. When she called again, louder this time, I paused the game with an annoyed sigh. "What?" I yelled back, but then silence. I waited, the faint hum of my computer the only sound. After a few seconds, I shrugged and unpaused the game. Probably just asking if I wanted something from the store, then changed her mind. Then came the third call. "Noah, can you come here for a second?" This time, something about it made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't just the words, it was the cadence. Too slow, too deliberate, and the timing was all wrong. I checked my phone. 2:37 p.m. Mom worked until 5 p.m. on weekdays, sometimes later if there was an emergency at the hospital. She never came home early. The apartment felt different suddenly. The usual background noises, the refrigerator humming, the faint traffic from the street below were gone. Just absolute silence, thick and suffocating. Even the ever-present ticking of the living room clock had stopped. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back and hit the wall with a thud. My bare feet stuck slightly to the laminate flooring as I walked to my door. The hallway looked normal, same scuffed baseboards, same framed family vacation photos, all featuring Gabe and Mom smiling while I scowled in the background. But the air felt heavier somehow, like walking through water. Mom's bedroom door was slightly ajar, the way she always left it. A sliver of blue light spilled out from her computer screen. I could see her silhouette at the desk, her shoulders moving slightly as she typed. "Hey," I said, lingering in the doorway. My voice sounded too loud in the unnatural quiet. "You're home early?" I asked. But she didn't turn around, just kept typing, the click-clack of the keys oddly sharp in the stillness. She murmured. Then after a pause that stretched just a beat too long, "How are you doing?" The question threw me. Mom wasn't the type for small talk. When she spoke to me these days, it was usually just to remind me about chores or ask if I'd done my homework. Fine? I shifted my weight from foot to foot. The floor felt strangely warm beneath my toes. "Why?" Still facing the screen, she asked, "Will you go check on your brother?" That's when the first real thread of unease coiled in my gut. Mom never asked me to check on Gabe, not since the fight, not since we'd established our unspoken rule of mutual avoidance. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah, sure," I said, backing out of the room. The dining area, or what passed for Gabe's room, was separated from the living room by a heavy black curtain Mom had hung last year. It swayed slightly as I approached, though there was no breeze, no open windows. I hesitated, then grabbed the rough fabric and pulled it aside. Gabe was sprawled on his mattress, face down, one arm dangling limply over the side. His fishing hat lay crumpled on the floor, surrounded by a scattering of hooks and lures. That alone was strange. Gabe never napped during the day. He was either glued to his phone, out with friends, or giving me the silent treatment. Sleeping at 2:30 in the afternoon? Not like him. "Gabe?" My voice came out higher than I intended. I nudged his leg with my foot. "Wake up." Burn no response from him, so I nudged harder. "Gabe, come on." But still nothing. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I reached out and shook his shoulder. "Gabe!" His body rolled limply onto its back, and that's when I saw it. His face was pale, unnaturally so, like all the blood had drained from it. His lips were slightly parted, his eyes half open but unfocused. For one terrifying second, I thought he was dead. Then he gasped, a sharp, wet inhale, like someone breaking the surface after nearly drowning. His eyes flew open, wide and bloodshot, and locked onto mine. His pupils were huge, black pools swallowing the blue of his irises. "Hey, Noah," he said, his voice flat and toneless, his lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What's up?" I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The curtain fell back into place as I turned and ran, my bare feet slapping against the floor. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, the door locked behind me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, ready to call 911. That's when it rang. It was from Mom. I answered with trembling fingers. "Hello?" "Noah." Her real voice, not the one from down the hall. "Gabe and I have been out running errands for a few hours. What do you want for dinner tonight?" The blood drained from my face. "What?" I got shocked. "We're at the grocery store," she said, sounding confused. "Do you want pizza or something from the deli?" I couldn't breathe. "So, you're not home?" I asked. "No, are you okay? You sound strange." I didn't say anything and hung up, and then a slow, deliberate scratch dragged across my bedroom door. Then 3 soft knocks, and then, in a voice that was almost Mom's, but not quite, too wet, too guttural, "Noah, let us in." I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I threw open my window, the rusty frame screeching in protest, and ripped out the bug screen with a strength I didn't know I had. The 2-story drop didn't even register as I jumped, branches scraping my arms as I crashed through the bushes below. I ran, across the yard, across the street, pounding on old Mr. Peterson's door until he answered. his face a mask of alarm at the sight of me. Wild-eyed, barefoot, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. The cops came. They searched the apartment top to bottom. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No evidence of an intruder. Nothing out of place except my own overturned chair and the torn window screen. When Mom and Gabe returned an hour later, they found me sitting on the Petersons' couch, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic checking my vitals. "Noah?" Mom's face paled as she took in the scene. "What happened?" "Are you hurt?" the officers explained. My frantic call, my claims of someone in the house. Mom listened, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. When they finished, she pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel her heart racing against my chest. "It's okay," she murmured into my hair, her familiar lavender shampoo scent somehow grounding. "You're safe now. It's okay." Over her shoulder, Gabe stood silently, his usual scowl replaced by an unreadable expression. His eyes, normal again, flicked toward the apartment, then back to me. That was a week ago. I haven't slept well since. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains sends my heart racing. The doctors say it was probably sleep deprivation. A waking nightmare brought on by too many energy drinks and not enough rest. But sometimes, when I wake gasping in the middle of the night, I could swear I hear it. The faint sound of typing from down the hall. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite one, hit that like button, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Thanks for watching.